Fantastic. So, hello and welcome everyone to this ISM webinar on the road, a guide for touring musicians. My name is Frederick and I'm a part of the team here at the Independent Society of Musicians. And to describe myself for the purpose of accessibility, I am a white man in his 20s with brown hair and brown eyes. Now, today I am delighted to be joined by an exceptional panel of musicians and touring experts. This includes founder of Viva La Visa, Andy Corrigan, drummer and musical director Dwayne Sanford, multi-instrumentalist Nick Fowler, and ISM's own senior research associate Jodie Underhill. Now, before we begin this webinar, there's just a few things for you guys to note. Please do introduce yourselves to your fellow attendees in the chat box below. Let us know your role in music and where you're joining us from. During the webinar, please feel free to ask questions using the Q&A function, and we will do our best to answer these at the end. Please do keep an eye on the chat box, and we're going to basically put loads of really useful links, loads of tips, tricks, all those sort of things. It's a good place to sort of keep an eye on throughout the webinar. If you do experience any kind of technical difficulties, just let us know in that chat box, and we'll attempt to resolve this for you. And if you wish to use them, subtitles are available to enable at the bottom of your screen. The webinar is being recorded and we will share this recording with you afterwards, so you can go back and review any bits that you want to look at again. Now, I'm very pleased to hand over to our incredible panel, so each of them can introduce themselves. First up, I'd like to introduce Andy Corrigan. Andy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Frederick and team. My name's Andy Corrigan. I run a company called Viva La Visa, and as the name suggests, we help musicians and other people in the creative industries, theatre, TV, etc., to get visas and work permits and passports and everything else that they might need to travel to tour around the world. And have been working with ISM for quite a few years now, and we provide a free advice service for ISM members that if you have any questions about anything to do with touring, or particularly visas and permits, you can come and ask us. Viva La Visa has been going since about 2009, and we're a team we're mostly based down in Suffolk in country. We have a little office in London near Aldgate, and we've got a team of about 14 of us, and we cover all kinds of visas, and we're including, we have a retained US lawyer on our team. My background is originally I was a musician and then a tour manager, and a musician and tour manager. And so I came at it from the end of having to do visa applications, while the band were off having fun, and I'd be queuing up at embassies and consulates around the world to get in visas. And when I stopped being on the road and was at home looking after my little twins, as they were little then. I wasn't doing much road work, but I did get asked by one of our touring bands called Steel Pulse, reggae band from Birmingham, with people from Jamaica and America and around the world. So they couldn't get into Canada, some of them, and I helped them out, and it just grew from there, starting off with one person, and growing the team. And we love it. We try to keep up with the changes in rules and what the extraordinary government in America are doing, and trying to make life difficult for us. And obviously, for people in the UK, try to keep up with what's been happening in Europe, what continues to happen in Europe. And we understand that it's a big issue. Getting Europe is it's a daunting prospect, and we try to they're there to hold your hand if you're trying to get visas or work permits to tour. So that's me. Thank you.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Andy. Next, hello, Dwayne. Lovely to have you with us. Would you be able to just introduce yourself to the group? Dwayne, are you with us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Hello, how are you doing?
Yeah, I lost connection for a second.
Don't worry.
Hi guys, Dwayne Sanford, I'm in London. I am a musician and music director. I've worked with the Who's Who's, I've worked with the Dua Lipas, the Khaleesi's, the Liam Paynes, many more to mention. Currently in France right now, so joining you guys off the back of the project. Yeah, I've been touring for years and I've had experience as a musician and as a music director, and obviously working alongside tour managers and stuff, we get to see some of the logistical things that they have to basically cover and how it affects touring. So, um, as we're gathered here today, that's what we'll be talking about.
Incredible. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Nick. Hello, Nick. Would you be able to just introduce yourself to the group?
Lovely to meet all of you. And yeah, so just a brief summary. I got into the music game very early. I was 16 years old, and my band that I formed with school friends signed to deal with London Records. And and then when I was 17, we were dropped. But I just sort of carried on, you know. But more sort of like going forward, I've been more of a sort of session musician, as it were. The most significant gig that I have is with Gaz Coombs, who is the singer of Supergrass. And so we've done 12 years of touring together, which has been amazing. And he is such a wonderful leader and kind person, which is good. That's really important when you're touring, to have someone who you get on with and is a good leader, you know. Yeah, so it's been a long road. I've been to Australia, Japan, the States, all over Europe and UK, and yeah, so it's been a great ride, you know. But it has its challenges, you know. But also, you know, I still play small shows, small club shows, and so it's, yeah, you just have to be humble and kind of get on with it, you know.
Very much so. Lovely. Thank you, Nick. And then last but not least, Jodie. Hello. Would you be able to just introduce yourself to the group?
Yeah, of course, Frederick. Hi, I'm Dr. Jodie Underhill. I'm the Senior Research Associate here at the ISM. I've been involved in the Brexit space since about 2021, when I wrote our visa and work permit guide, and continue to maintain that. I was also the lead author on our 6th Brexit report, Paying the Price. And day to day, I work with the External Affairs team, supporting members with queries that they might have, but also lobbying government for change to make touring easier for artists.
Superb. It's a lot of really interesting stuff and such a brilliant panel. We're going to have, I think, an exceptional session today. I want to jump straight into our questions. So first thing I wanted to ask all of you guys is, what would you say are the essential first steps musicians should take when they're planning a tour?
Okay, I'll go first. Don't sort of put yourself into a situation that is, when I say dangerous, or financially, compromising. The touring situation now is so difficult, and all the money has gone to the top, to the likes of Live Nation, and you know what I mean, like it's become a kind of the money floats upwards, as it were. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Nick.
Yeah. And so what I would say is to be sort of mindful of trying to build up a local network first, and not necessarily try to burn yourself out by traveling loads and spending money. And yeah, that would be my advice. But
excellent. And then Dwayne, what would you say essential first steps?
So I think especially if it's your first tour, and you've never embarked on a tour before, I think you should check what the weather is like in the different places that you're going to, so you know exactly what to pack, because it will be a disaster if you pack what you think the weather for what you think the weather's going to be like and it's not that. So just be mindful of that. You know, there's weather apps you can use to check the weather in advance for the different regions that you're going to. Personally, I use the BBC Weather app, which is amazing. You can basically save all the destinations that you're going to in advance, and you can kind of monitor what the weather's going to be like on, you know, the given days that you're going to be in certain places. In regards to the music side of things, it's important to make sure you have the music under your fingers. Be comfortable with what you've rehearsed. You know, in most case scenarios, people record rehearsals. So once you have the recordings, even when rehearsals are done, and you think, ah, yes, I know the set, still listen to it. When you're flying, if you're in the kitchen doing the washing up, if you're driving to the hairdresser to get your hair done in advance, you know, before traveling, like just take those moments just to take it all in. Figure out what you're going to do on your days off. That's an important one, because on your days off, you're going to be in so many different places, and there's going to be so many great opportunities to do great things. You know, there's going to be some places that will have, you know, monuments and stuff like that, you know, you might not have traveled to these places if it wasn't for touring. So make the most of your days off. Also, if you have hobbies, maybe try to keep up those hobbies when you're abroad. If you're into gym, get a gym pass, you know, so you can access gyms all over the world. What else? If you have family and friends abroad, make plans to see them. It makes a world of a difference, because, you know, when you're touring with a bunch of people who, you know, essentially you're gelling with, who you might not have known before. And sometimes you just need those creature comforts, and, you know, seeing family and friends on the road, it's just a nice break up in the tour bubble, if you want to call it that. Also, make sure you get any jabs that you need. So there's certain regions in the world that require jabs. You know, South America is a big one. Also parts of Asia as well. You know, in Indonesia, for example, I was in Bali last year and I caught Bali belly. You know, and I probably could have prepared better for that. Also in Indonesia, they have something called wind enter as well, which is basically like a cold, but it's different to ours. So yeah, just making sure you boost your immunity, or just ensuring that, you know, you don't drink water in certain places and stuff like that. Also, go online and familiarize yourself with basic laws and etiquette of the places you are going to. An example could be like in America, jaywalking is, you know, frowned upon in certain states. I don't think it's illegal per se, but you can get in trouble for it. So look out for that kind of stuff. Also, alcohol laws can prevent you from playing in certain venues. So I guess this is more from a tour manager perspective. If you're hiring personnel, just ensure that, you know, some of the clubs you're playing in, they'll be able to play in there, and that, you know, the laws won't be an issue for you. The last two that I've got, sorry, invest in packing cubes, because you're going to be constantly on the move. You know, at most you're going to be staying in places for 2 days max, maybe 3 days if you're lucky. So, you know, you're living out of a suitcase. Just make life easy for yourself, be organized. And the last thing I would say is learn basic sentences and words in different languages for the different regions you're going to, sorry, so that when you go there, you know, you can communicate with the locals, especially when it comes to like going to restaurants and stuff like that. I think it's just really courteous to just like at least learn the basics. So yeah, that's my input.
Definitely. Love that. Fantastic. Thank you, Dwayne. Next up, Jodie, what would you say essential first steps for musicians?
I think once you know where you're going is to check what those visa and work permit requirements are, especially now in Europe. You have kind of 27 countries to navigate, all different kinds of requirements, the lengths of times you can stay, whether you can undertake paid work, for how long that will be, as well as any other requirements like transporting your equipment and instruments, whether you need carnets, whether you can take merchandise, all of those kind of real logistic things that you need to consider. Also, how you're going to get to places if you're a kind of small operation, if you're going in a splitter van, those sorts of things, where you're going to leave the country from, when you're going to arrive, because there are different requirements from different ports of entry. So really all of those sort of logistic things.
Incredible, yes, and so important, because if you mess those up, it suddenly becomes very, very difficult. Which leads us perfectly on to Andy. Andy, what would you say first steps musicians when they're going on tour?
Well, you'd expect me to say, make sure you get your visas and work permits, but I'd say first thing, agreeing with Dwayne, is make sure your music's have some really good music that you're proud to play and really, really enjoy it. Because going on tour and playing music live is great. It's one of the best, the best thing you can do in the world. And make sure you do enjoy that. And the other things, yeah, you've got to be, like Jodie said and everyone else said, you've got to be organised and can make sure everything's in place and that your splitter is a reasonably good one, doesn't break down and all that kind of stuff. And like Dwayne said, try and be sympathetic to the local places you're going to and get the most out of it and do. I mean, I toured for a long time and a lot of places I went to, I didn't do any sightseeing. I didn't see the places. I just kind of worked and that was it. But latterly I made up for it. And it's important. It's a great experience and it can be a heck of a lot of fun. But you've got to sort out that you've got to do the pre-production is important and make sure you do pre-prep and you advance the shows. And it's easy to do now, because of the last goodness knows how many years we've had internet and you can know what to expect when you arrive there and you can communicate. You'll know if there's parking, you'll know if there's 3 flights of stairs to get your gear into the little venue and all that kind of thing. And you'll know in advance. Yeah, that's it. I guess somebody said to me, and when you're a new outfit starting out, because it's obviously different for the kind of people that, Dwayne would work with when it's a big organization and they've got, 100 crew. If it's, Dua Lipa, there's loads of you. But if you're your own little outfit and there's, 3 or 4 of you or 5 altogether, you've got to be your own CEO. So you've got to be, no one's going to love your music and you as much as you do. And you've got to be there, make sure you've got your merch together and you do your sums and you've got to be out there, you play your gig and you're out there on the merch stall and you're planning and you're doing, and you're on doing your socials, making sure you're taking photos and videoing your gigs. You're running your own little business but at the same time, you can still have a lot of fun. But don't stress it too much,
Yeah. Sorry, just off the back of what Andy just said in regards to recording footage, I would also say check with whoever's in charge if that's okay, because sometimes people can be very anal about that. Sorry to use that word, but yeah, people can be really finicky about that. So just make sure that that's something that's okay to do.
Yeah, definitely. The last thing you want to do is be getting in trouble on tour for putting something up on Instagram that is leaked ahead of time. Yeah. And I think that leads me perfectly on to my next question, which is tour life can be brutal. What would you guys say are the common or practical or logistical mistakes that musicians can make, but also the practicalities they should be considering on the daily to make sure they're taking care of themselves physically, mentally, keeping those good working relationships and making sure that your stamina is sort of maintained over the course of a tour? Can I direct that to Dwayne first?
Yeah, so these are more of the practical ones. Avoid overpacking because you will get an alarming bill when you get to, the check-in desk. Thankfully, I've never been in that predicament, but I've seen people be in that predicament and it's ugly. You're spending money that you didn't want to spend or you didn't account for. Secondly, do not forget your passport. I've seen this happen many a time and people have had to go home, get the passport and book their own flight. And you don't want to do that. In terms of finance, always make sure you have a physical card with you, whether that's a debit or credit card, because you don't know what emergency is going to arise. And, I know we live in a day whereby we have contactless, but what if your phone gets stolen or if it's broken, financially you're stuck. And, usually in this day and age as well, you can have per diems physically in cash, but a lot of the times now you can get them transferred to your card or to your account. And if you do not have access to that, you are finished. So make sure for contingency purposes, you have different forms of cash so that if you're stranded, you can get home or if you get into an accident, you can pay at the hospital. I don't know. Just make sure you're not in that predicament. Travel insurance. Always ask if the tour has travel insurance that covers you, because if you do not, then yeah, you could, again, you're incurring bills that you don't need to incur. You're on tour to make money, not to spend it. Also, make sure you have ID. Make sure you have ID with you. You never know why you need ID. Because you could be going to a bar, you could be playing at a venue, and they just have a strict policy whereby everyone who enters needs ID. Just have ID on you. It's just the best thing you could do. Don't take any valuable items with you to certain parts of the world. So I remember my first time touring in South America, we was issued a warning from the production team that it's not advisable to take anything that is valuable, as in South America, they're known, or not they, but it's known that people often, or foreigners should I say, are often robbed for valuable items. So you want to be low key, you want to blend in, you don't want to stand out too much and put yourself in danger. Um, Plugs, make sure you buy the relevant plugs for the countries you're going to. Also buy a charge pack because again, if your phone dies or you can't charge your phone, you can't communicate with people. And as you know, on our phones we have Master Tour, which is an all-encompassing app which tells you all the information and details about the tour. If you cannot access that, then you don't know what's going on. You're out of the loop. So make sure your phone is always charged. Um, Also, this one is more of a personal preference, but buy an eSIM. From my personal experience, I would say buy an eSIM. It works out cheaper. With a lot of our phone packages, they claim that roaming is unlimited. It's not unlimited. It's a fair usage policy. And that fair usage policy, for example, with free is 12 gigabyte. And once that 12 gigabyte is over, you do not have any more data. So it's more cost effective to get an eSIM. I personally use one called Jetpack, which is incredible. I've used it in so many different continents. It's amazing. It never drops out. I would implore everyone to get that. So yeah, those are my contributions to that question.
Fantastic, thank you. Could I pass it over to Andy? Any ideas on sort of mistakes musicians make or practicalities they should look out for?
Well, from the point of view as a visa company, the main mistake is not allowing enough time for processing of visa applications. That's the first, second, and third mistake that people make because things take a long time. The bureaucracies of various countries to allow you to go in do take longer and longer, it seems, and it's very easy to underestimate how long these things take. And we get on a daily basis, we get inquiries from people, whether it's from record companies, bands, or individuals, saying, "Can we want to do this next week? Can we do it?" And we'd love to help, but we can't do it. And the days have long gone when we could telephone embassies and things like that and get someone to bend the rules and help. It's become more and more difficult to get that to do that. And in terms of obviously we're talking about two different scenarios here. We're talking about people from Dwayne's point of view and Nick's point of view. We're talking about individuals working for another organization, and I was talking more from the band, the people operating as a group. And while obviously you're operating as a group, you can do what you want. Whereas if you're an individual, you're bound by the rules of your employers and the tour. And as Dwayne was saying, you do, when you are a touring musician in a bigger organization, you do have to be self-reliant. Although you be looked after to a large extent, you have to be self-reliant and do this and do the sensible things. I totally concur by being prepared and things that can rack up costs like data. It's not quite as bad as it used to be, and I think just trying to be when you're planning for your touring. Again, it's when you're an individual, make sure that you are covered, and the insurance point of view, and that you pack sensibly and don't take too many things with you and don't get excess baggage and stuff. And when it's a group, you're doing your band planning. Don't be a bit conservative in terms of travel times and things. It's so many 100 miles to this or K's to the next gig. Take into account traffic and things like that, because it's a very stressful situation when you're frantically trying to get to a gig and you're not going to make it because of traffic or whatever. Pre-planning, as like I said before, that's the key.
Fantastic, lovely. And then Nick, would you say from your experience, any mistakes musicians make or practicalities they should look out for?
Oh, many mistakes made. Most of them my own. I sort of approach touring in a sort of more philosophical way. And the hardest thing about touring, and there's a quote from Charlie Watts from Rolling Stones, is it's 90% of waiting around and 10% of doing what you do, and for me, the hardest thing is always the 90%, yeah, because and you have to be focused and gear yourself up for that moment, when you're on, kind of thing. So yeah, my mistakes have been, going to the pub in the daytime or whatever, what I mean, things like that, and just trying to focus on the show. That's the main thing. And also, in later life, I'm 45 now. I've got better at kind of knowing when to go to bed, if that makes sense. Like, I will get on there was a time in Luxembourg, I was playing with Gaz Coombs, and we supported Robbie Williams in Luxembourg, and it was a great show. And I was like, right, I'm going to bed now, which was the right choice. But then, like, the next day, I was like, what happened last night? And they were like, oh, we hung out with the royal family of Luxembourg. and so I was just like, I was a bit annoyed. But in later life, I've got better at sort of knowing when to go to bed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Lovely, thank you. And my next question is sort of bringing things round to visas and work permits. So Andy, I wanted to ask you, what would you say are the most common roadblocks musicians are facing when working abroad, and how can they avoid last-minute issues with those visas and work permits?
Going back to what I said before, allowing sufficient time, because if you're going, for instance, if you're doing a tour of the Far East, you're probably doing Japan, China, Thailand, South Vietnam, many of which, South Korea, many of which require you to do a visa process where your passport has to go away, and the logistics of, they'll be away for a certain amount of time, and putting those things in line. And making sure you've got enough time to do them all, it can end up being problematic. And we've come across this situation many times before. Sorry, say the question again. What was it?
It's sort of
visas and permits. Yeah,
visas and permits.
Yeah, the US, the problems being, the US has got more and more difficult to get into. When the current categories that musicians go to the US under, which is the O and P visas for individuals and groups respectively, when they were brought in back in the 90s, they were brought in by liberal lawyers drafted the legislation, and it was meant to open up the US for creative people to come in and perform and work there. And every subsequent administrations have made it tougher. And the Trump administration obviously is terrible, but it's not. It didn't start making them more difficult. So every time that there's more rules, and the rules are applied more rigorously, and in a more pernickety way, and sometimes incorrectly. And again, what it ends up doing, it ends up taking more time, and factoring in that amount of time to do it. In terms of Europe, the biggest problem, I suppose, that we've come across for musicians from the UK performing in Europe, or from other countries that don't require visas, is the 180-day rule. That most countries in Europe have allowances that you can go and perform without needing a work permit or a visa if you're from a non-visa country, but they're really strict on the amount of days, the cumulative amount of days that you can spend in that EU Schengen. I use the words interchangeably, but they're not exactly the same. The amount of time you can spend in that area, and with the electronic system that came in last month, they're going to be checking up even more carefully. They were before on overstaying, and people will be not permitted. And it's quite difficult to juggle your time and your schedule, particularly if you're a session player that's a popular session player. You can be going from one tour to another, or particularly with tech people. There's a lot of tech people based in the UK, and they end up running out of days, and just and unable to do things, and and if you've got, want to go to your villa in Tuscany as well, then that's, that's a further problem.
I want to go a bit
nice one to
deeper
have,
into
possibly, but yeah.
But when you do have the Schengen allowance, what do musicians need to know about that, especially if they may not have heard about it before?
Okay.
And if they do travel into the EU after their allowance is used up, is there anything they can do?
Short answer is no. The only thing that stops the clock on the Schengen allowance is, and by the way, if people do have questions about it, there are several calculators online that you can put your days in, when you're going to be there, when you hope to, intending to be there, and it'll tell you how many days you've got left. If anyone doesn't know, just ping us an email and we'll send you a link to them, and they're really handy to do. And bear in mind that every day counts. Travel days count in the area, and every other day. The only thing that stops the clock on the Schengen on the allowance is a long stay visa. Well, obviously there are some slight exceptions. There is a long stay visa in for a particular, but they're issued on a country by country basis. So there's no such thing as a pan-European long stay visa. So if you get a long stay visa for Germany, that's fine. The clock stops in Germany, but it doesn't stop in the other territories. So it only saves you the time. So it's a problem. So we get people, particularly with France, is a relatively straightforward long stay visa called the talent passport that we've done for a wide range of musicians and other kinds of creative folk. But it's a difficult one, and it's in some cases that you can't do it, and we see it on some of the bigger tours that people will be just flown in for the actual show dates and then flown out again, so that on travel dates to mean that they can work it. And I know from Joe's point, I know there's a lot of lobbying going on to try and change the rules, and hopefully something will be thrashed. Will come. We've sorted out in time, but at the moment it's going to be a long slog. I mean, back in 2014, there was an EU proposal for a touring visa, and it was all laid out. The UK wasn't much to do with it, but it was all there, and it fizzled out and didn't go any further. The framework was all set out, and it was the kind of thing that everyone would have wanted. But hopefully it will happen soon. But at the moment it's tricky, and yeah.
Well, that's what, Jodie, I'd love to ask you. In terms of policy right now, what should musicians be aware of or actively looking out for when it comes to touring?
So I think the one positive with the change of government is that there is a sort of renewed enthusiasm to make a change, but materially nothing has changed, unfortunately. There was an EU-UK summit earlier in the year in May, and there was language in the subsequent documents that kind of expressed both sides' desire to improve touring, but the kind of solutions then, it stopped short of offering solutions. In terms of what the ISM lobby for, we lobby for a visa waiver agreement, but also the idea of a 2-year touring visa, which, as Andy said, was originally kind of proposed by the EU back in 2014 and fizzled out because the 90 and 180 days is a particular problem, especially if you want to go to different countries. If you could get a long stay visa for one country, that's fine, but on a tour you're obviously going around many countries. And you really don't want to overstay, especially now with the electronic entry and exit system. You face a ban for future travel, you face instant deportation, you risk fines. It's just not worth risking. There are other things going on, particularly for classical musicians who maybe have instruments containing protected materials. So musical instrument certificates, which are needed to travel with those, have always been free. The government want to now charge for those, so it would be £200 per application plus £61 per permit. They've actually been free since 2013. There was a consultation in October, which we responded to, so we're kind of waiting to hear what happens with that. The other thing that's kind of happening imminently is in relation to Pernambuco wood, which is used often for bows. In fact, it's used for most bows. It's Brazil wood, and Brazil have put forward a proposal at the COP to move it into Appendix 1, which is kind of the most protected category. If that happens, it would make sales of those bows almost impossible, and it would mean that anyone traveling with them would need a musical instrument, but some countries don't recognize mix, so that could cause lots of problems. We've mentioned the electronic entry and exit system, which is fairly new. It had been kind of postponed a few times, but is now kind of rolling out. It's supposed to be rolled out in its entirety by April next year. So some countries are just collecting biometric data. Some are doing a kind of all in one, but by April, all countries should be doing everything in those Schengen countries. And the other thing that's coming further down the line next year is the ETIAS, which is a bit like the American ESTA system, the visa waiver. If you have a visa to go and work in the EU, you won't need to do the ETIAS, but we're expecting that. Again, it keeps being postponed, but the EU are now saying the last quarter of 2026. So that's something to look out for. But yeah, unfortunately, not an awful lot has changed, but obviously we work behind the scenes to try and make that change happen.
God, I love some ISM campaigning. We're always pushing the fight.
Can I just say one thing?
Yes, of course, Nick.
Yeah, of course. Just out of experience, in 2023, I was playing with Gaz Coombs in Primavera Festival in Spain, and we flew back, and there was like the tour manager is very efficient and on the ball, but there was one stamp missing from our what do they call it, a carnet? Yeah, and we were threatened with an £8,000 fine. And that's just obscene, you know. I think for musicians, really terrible, you know. That's just not acceptable.
No, not at all. And actually, I don't know whether everyone on this call will be aware of sort of those important forms and things. Andy and Jodie, I wanted to ask you guys explicitly if you can tell us a little bit about A1 forms and carnets. What are they? When do musicians need them? Are there consequences if you don't have one? Which I think from what Nick said, there can be some quite scary consequences.
Want me to go?
Yes.
I can take the carnets, or
how about Jodie? You take carnets.
You lead. I don't mind. What after you.
So a carnet is a temporary admission document to travel with your instruments and equipment. It's generally recommended for unaccompanied or non-portable instruments and equipment. One of the issues around carnets is that different border agents will interpret that in different ways. For a long time, there was no definition of what equipment was, but recently the EU kind of clarified that it has to be equipment that supports the use of the instrument. It's a kind of multi-page document. You have to list everything you're taking with you. That could be, you know, every single lead you're taking has to be accounted for. If something gets broken while you're on tour, you have to bring it back, because the carnet is kind of your guarantee that you are not exporting your instruments and equipment, that you are bringing it back with you. Some border officials will go through that form in great detail. Others will kind of just maybe kind of scan over it and let you through. One thing to be aware of with carnets is that they have to be stamped before you leave, but not all carnet offices are in the location you might be leaving from. So I think Eurotunnel has one that's sort of 100 miles away that you have to stop and get it stamped first. I had a query from someone who was travelling to Timpani and trying to get a decision on whether that would be classed as portable or non-portable was quite difficult. It can sometimes vary with the country that you're first kind of arriving in as to what their border officials will say. We've certainly had instances in the past where border officials have stopped people, and because even without the carnet, they've then inquired about the kind of provenance of their instrument and have asked for receipts to show that they own it. If you don't have a carnet, and you don't always need one, but again, it's sort of risky depending on which border official you may get. If you are stopped and they confiscate your instrument, you know, you're faced with a big fine of having to pay to get that back. So it can get very, very complicated, especially if you're traveling with lots of equipment and you need to fill that in. You know, it's got to be very accurate. Or as Nick said, you know, you can end up in that situation where somebody doesn't like something on your form, and they will yeah, kind of go after you with the full force.
Not fun. And then, Andy, would you be able to tell us a bit about the A1 forms?
Well, I was just going to talk a little bit about but thank you, Jodie, about Carnets, because I mean it is a pain to do. There are companies that can help them do them for you. Not blowing our trumpet, but we do Carnets, do quite a lot. And I remember when, as a tour manager, touring Europe, when you had to have a carnet for every single border crossing, which if you were going to Germany was quite a lot. Going from, you know, you go through, you know, France, Holland, Belgium, then Germany. It could take a long time. The exception for personal instruments, which came in fairly recently, and it is a bit vaguely worded, isn't it, Jodie? And it says if you're carrying a personal instrument with you, you know, that you're traveling with you, not in a truck separate. So it's, and we've interpreted that if it's a band in a splitter, they've got their personal instruments with them, and they change that from the instrument to whatever it means. As Jodie said, whatever it means needs to make that instrument work. So if it's a guitar amp, but then the guitar amp is that, you know, is that a Fender Twin, a little combo, or is it, you know, or you Angus Young with 16 Marshall cabinets? Probably not. That's, you know, that's what it needs to be. And the question of, is it portable, the timpani thing? I mean, our advice is, if you're in any doubt, you can always get a carnet. If you're nervous about it, get a carnet. But if you're an experienced traveler or a tour person, you can probably, you know, it's a possibility to talk to the border people. They're not, some of them are horrible, not all of them are, and say my drum kit is my personal instrument, and those are the rules, and that's been introduced for out of the UK and into Europe. And regarding the getting the Dover Eurotunnel thing, it's down the road, so you have to know, and you have to have the number, a goods movement reference number, which is easy to get before you do. You've got to do these things before you travel with your carnet. And it's good if anyone's in any doubt, you can do it all yourself, but it's, you know, advice is possible to get. You can speak to us about it. And carnets can be done like the day before, but it's better to leave it a little bit, give yourself a little bit of leeway. And in terms of carnets, you can't add, if once you've done your list, you can't add anything to it, but you can take things away from it. You can say, I'm not traveling. This item is not going with us on this trip. But, you know, once you've done it once or twice, you'll get into the groove of it, and you'll find that they're not that onerous. You've got to do it, and you've got to make sure once you had it stamped once, you must have it stamped back into the UK. Otherwise, it's a painful process with the Chamber of Commerce. A1 forms so going on to A1 forms, everyone's supposed to have one working outside of the UK. It's a certificate to show that you make national insurance contributions in your home country, so they don't deduct them from your fees out of the country. And there's two different forms that you go, one if you're self-employed, or one if you're an employee. And I know they have been, I think they are getting better. There were huge delays on them. They were very, very slow for a long time. I believe, and again, there's been quite a lot of lobbying from Jodie nodding there to try and get them to, put their ideas up, because it was causing problems. Because again, some promoters would be saying, you can take the email in saying, look, I've applied for my A1, it hasn't come through yet. Are you still cool with it? And someone say, no, we're not. We're deducting, and so. But hopefully that's better. Get it again. You need to allow a few weeks in advance to do this. But again, it's not that onerous. Again, once you've done it once, you can, it's not that difficult.
It all becomes familiar in the end.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So play lots of gigs and tour, yeah.
In terms of the A1, they aim to get them done within 15 days, but it's taking much, much longer. You can track it on the HMRC website, and sometimes it's taking 6 to 9 months. So it's quite a big discrepancy between what they say they're aiming for. And the other thing I forgot to mention with carnets is that most carnets, you pay for your carnet and then you have to pay a security deposit, which is around 40% of the value of the goods that you're taking. So that can be quite a lot of money to kind of pay up front. It's a security guarantee that says you will bring back that those instruments and equipment, that you're not trying to sort of export them under the radar. So it's just something to be aware of. We do offer a discount through the London Chamber of Commerce, which I'm sure someone will put in the chat.
Definitely. Lovely. So the last question I wanted to ask you guys before I open it up to the panel is I wanted to ask everyone, what would you say is the biggest challenge facing touring musicians right now? And where do you see within those challenges opportunities for growth, for change, for making things better? Can I throw that out to Dwayne first?
Yeah, sure. I think as far as musicians in Europe goes, and I mean Europe, not EU, so that includes people who live in the UK, it's made it increasingly tougher for musicians and artists to tour Europe, actually, especially if you're from the UK and vice versa, the other way around. Because there's a lot more red tape now with Brexit. You're seeing less British acts on European festival lineups and vice versa. Also, as Jodie mentioned about the 180-day rule, that's kind of ruined opportunities for a lot of people as well. I know someone, I'm not going to mention any names, but I know someone who was playing for an artist who was about to go on tour in Europe, and they couldn't go on the road with them because they'd used up their 180 days. So therefore, they lost the gig, not because they'd done anything wrong, but because the laws have changed and they'd used up their day. So I think Brexit, as an example, is probably one of the biggest things that has affected, musicians touring and artists touring, especially smaller artists as well, who, don't generate enough money to kind of like, take the blow essentially financially. Yeah, it just doesn't avail them the chance to get out into Europe and to perform anymore, which is quite sad.
Definitely. Next up, could I pass it on to Jodie?
Yeah, I think I would echo what Dwayne said, especially those emerging artists that were trying to build a profile in Europe to then be able to kind of justify the visa requirements to get into the US and beyond. It's been harder to do that. I think just kind of navigating all those new rules, plus the additional costs. I know we heard from our research, we're paying the price, the additional costs for everything, not just visas, and work permits, carnets, all of those sorts of things, but those hidden costs like the roaming charges, like traveling to embassies to get your visas and work permits authorized, sending in those documents, having to get duplicate documents, having to get things notarized, that level of red tape and additional cost, but also the extra time at the border, the extra time on travel days, things like that. We know that people have been traveling back and forth to try and save days wherever they can. It's also made people think twice about holidays, family holidays and things, because that also counts towards those 180 days. So yeah, lots of challenges, unfortunately, at the moment that, we're fighting hard to try and resolve.
Very much so. Nick, would you say any challenges people should be looking out for?
I agree with Jodie and Dwayne very much so. On the Brexit thing, because I've seen it firsthand, like coming through airports and having a tour manager having to sort of wrestle with people and negotiate and everything else, and that's that. The other thing that on a more sort of philosophical level is mental health. I think is one of the biggest excuse me, the big challenges of touring. Yeah. So there's the kind of logistics, and these additional pressures are not good for musicians. Yeah. Of these kind of bureaucratic challenges, it doesn't help.
Definitely doesn't add to things. And I would say, just to everyone watching, as an ISM member, we do have a whole host of mental health services available. So whether you're at home, abroad, on the road, those are accessible to you. There are phone numbers, there's support networks, there's all of those things. So I'm sure Ella will be able to share a link in the chat box to what services we have, but definitely take a look at those. It's really important. Do take care of yourself on the road. Last up, I'd like to ask Andy, challenges when people are on the road.
Well, challenges, yeah. As Nick said, the challenges are the challenges to mental health and general well-being. Things that, frankly, in the past we didn't really consider. It was just kind of, and people did suffer, and very badly and suffered in silence possibly. And those things, it's great that those things have come to the fore and are being addressed now, because ultimately, if you're if you're a musician or a crew person and you're in the right mental frame of mind and right state, you're going to do a better job and give a and give a better performance. And I think the whole thing with the Brexit thing brought into focus, it brought the whole problems of touring more into people's minds, whereas people before just say, well, we'll just go on and do it. But I think many of the actual problems appear to be worse than they are. I think it's still worth it. It's difficult and there are things to be overcome, and the 9180 days. It can seem as particular. I think if you're a solo musician, we have inquiries from quite a lot of ISM members who are solo artists who don't operate on big tours and don't have the support of tour manager, production manager, and all that kind of thing. And they think, oh God, it's so daunting. I haven't toured for 5 years. I really want to, and I just can't face it because that seems so awful. And my view is, yes, it does, but there are ways of dealing with it. There's help out there on every level and every kind of help to make it to make it worth your while, and you can still do it, and it's still jolly well worth it. Because the rewards of performing are great, and if you've got music, you want people to hear it. And going back to, as I said before, be your own CEO. Look at you're there to play music, and that's the main gazane, but you've got to look after the other things. You've got to maximize your income. And I think that it was Nick that mentioned that the business is polarized, that the acts at the top, the big tours at the top that take gazillions of dollars, and there are the people at the bottom still struggling, and people in the middle still struggling in the same to make ends meet in the same way they were, in the face of increasing costs on every level, whether it's diesel or insurance or van hire or mandolin strings or whatever it may be. Every single thing is more expensive, and that's why musicians have to be reliant, and maybe making alliances with other artists that are touring, say, well, why don't we do something together, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's more difficult, but it's still doable. And I think the difference is made that there are support systems in place that there didn't used to be. When I first started doing this business, I hadn't got a blooming clue who to ask about anything, and I had to do it, make it up as doing my first European tours, the first American tours, not the slightest idea what I was doing. Maybe still the case, but now I think use your ISM membership, use the support systems, and it's you can still make it work.
I think that's it. There's a great reassurance that there are organisations like the ISM that are here. They're lobbying, they're providing services, they're looking out for the musicians on the ground. So you can just play music, you can make what you want to make, and make sure people are hearing the beautiful sounds. I just want to quickly move over. We have loads and loads of questions from our attendees. So I'm going to try and get some of the sort of, as many as I can, into the mix. The first one I have here is for Jodie, which was asking, can I transport merch abroad?
Yes, but it's complicated. So you have to be aware of the country that you're traveling to, their customs requirements. For instance, if you're moving between the UK and the EU, you can export up to £2,500 worth of goods, but you can only take €1,000 worth into Europe. France has just made it a little bit harder because they now require an extra document. If I can get this right, the pronunciation, an envelope logistique obligatoire for all shipments, including any merchandise and baggage. And you'll need a UK EORI number. So it gets very, very complicated. But it's best to check what kind of the customs requirements for each country that you're planning to go to. We do have pages in our touring hub about merchandise and baggage, because it does depend on how much you're taking, the weight of it, as well as the value, and those sorts of things. But it is possible, but you just have to follow the rules and make sure your paperwork is up together.
Fantastic. And then next I have a question, I think, for Dwayne and Nick, which is asking about how important is the influence of a band manager? When is it most appropriate to hire a band manager, and how would you find one? Can I ask that to Dwayne first?
Yeah, sure. Is this in regards to like an originals band?
I suspect so, yes.
Yeah. If so, that's something I'm trying to figure out myself, to be perfectly honest with you. But I think one of the most important traits is integrity. You need someone who's integral, but also you need someone who's knowledgeable. and knows how to maneuver. So I think those are the two traits to look for if you are looking for a band manager, if you're going about it.
Excellent. Nick, would you have anything to add to that?
I totally agree with Dwayne. It might not be the most kind of experienced manager or company. It's someone who understands the act and the kind of the old school way of like record companies and publishing, live management. It's all become very fluid now. So you just want to get someone with some passion, I think, and for the act. And it doesn't have to be like, we need to hire a big manager at this point necessarily. Yeah, it's someone who can be a champion and who is smart,
Excellent. And then Andy, I have a question here for you as well. It's someone has asked, I am a British citizen, but a resident of Switzerland. Is that of advantage to me when traveling to other European countries?
No.
Oh,
sorry.
No.
Not really, because it's an advantage for being in Switzerland, but it's the visa requirements for other countries depend on what your passport, what passport you hold. There may be exemptions to that, which I can't think of anything off the top of my head. But as a general rule, it's visa requirements go with your passport, not with your residency.
Excellent. That's really good to know. And then I've got a last question, free for all, anyone who'd be able to answer it. Are concert fees usually made up front? If so, how can I navigate the tax and double taxation?
So do you mean do bands get paid up front for their gigs?
I think so, yes.
If you're lucky, try it. But generally, you wouldn't be. You might get depending on the deal, depending on on the power of who the band is and who the promoter is. In terms of withholding tax, speak to an accountant. But basically, if you earn money, you're probably liable to pay tax on it. You shouldn't have to pay tax twice on it. And in terms of when you get paid, if you can get paid a deposit up front, 50% deposit, then that's great, and that's non-refundable if the thing gets cancelled. But generally it will be paid afterwards if you're a lowly, an artist without much clout. But there are lots of specialist accountants who will guide you through the whole process. And every country in the world, in Europe, has different levels of withholding tax. And sometimes there are allowances you can make of expenses that you can make against that withholding tax. But generally, you have to pay it. I mean, there are for Canada and the US, there are arrangements you can make beforehand, but you've got to make them in time. It's the time things months ahead of your concert, and you can avoid the tax being deducted, some of the tax being deducted at the time. But again, get an accountant, and then and they will help you. There are lots of friendly ones out there.
And we have them as part of the ISM.
Exactly.
It's one of our services, so you guys can find it all there.
Yeah.
You guys have been an absolutely exceptional panel. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for diving into touring, all the things people should be knowing about on the road. To everyone watching, thank you for coming along. Thank you for attending. I know we didn't hit everyone's questions, but do please send them through. Our team will sort of be reviewing them and sending a follow-on after this. Please follow the links. We've got an incredible touring hub on our website, which has more information on everything, including information on the wonderful Viva La Visa that Andy runs. Viva La Visa is an ISM member benefit. So if you are a member, you have full access to that. You're able to get support and advice from them about permits, visas, all of those wonderful things. Check it out. I would also like to say to everyone, we have upcoming webinars in the new year. To keep up to date with everything, follow us. We're on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, TikTok, whatever it is. We're on it. Follow us, stay up to date with what we've got going on. But thank you so much. It's been a delight. Thank you to our panel, and I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.